Stand-up comedy takes a lot of courage. When it's just you and a microphone, if your material doesn't land, you've got nothing to fall back on. But there are far worse things that can happen to a comedian than getting booed off stage. Just look at what Nicolas Ferial, better known as Triboulet, had to deal with. Triboulet was a royal jester in France back in the late 1400s and early 1500s. He looked just like you expect a jester to look, with bright, form-fitting clothes, a cap with bells, and a prop stick with a carved head on it. But he used his position as the court jester to mock the nobles of the land. And on occasion, his quick wit and satire put his life in danger. I mean, you can't joke about kings and queens and not expect to eventually get canceled. Stand-up comedians still use comedy to critique the powerful, but will that always be the case? Will tomorrow's comedy be something very different? Let's explore the past, present, and future of comedy. With his jester's cap and wand mirroring the king's crown and scepter, Triboulet liked to declare himself the most noble in France, the sovereign lord of everyone he mocked. His reputation was immortalized by the 16th century French writer François Rabelais, whose series of novels about a pair of giants named Gargantua and Pantagruel enjoyed widespread popularity thanks to the printing press, which had been invented just 100 years earlier. Triboulet served the court of King Francis I, and there are a lot of funny stories about him. Stories about Triboulet show how his humor really pushed the envelope. He routinely offended the other nobles in the court and occasionally irritated the king himself. On one occasion, Triboulet made the mistake of insulting King Francis's lover. That went too far. Francis ordered him to be executed, but he granted him the opportunity to choose how he would die. Triboulet responded that he chose to die of old age. That line saved Triboulet's life. There was no way that King Francis could have put him to death without showing how much this jester had gotten under his skin. That's the amazing thing about comedy. Anyone can use it to take on the most powerful people in the world. If they respond with anger or violence, then they've shown everyone just how weak they really are. Humor presents a huge mystery about human nature. It's a philosophical question. Some philosophers, like Plato, Thomas Hobbes, and René Descartes, thought that laughter was inherently hostile, that people enjoyed comedy because it made them feel superior. For these thinkers, comedy was all about punching down. That might explain why some things are funny, but there's plenty of humor, like puns and absurdist jokes, that doesn't rely on scorn. Even self-deprecating humor, like the kind you might hear from comedy legends like Carol Burnett or Joan Rivers, seems to be less about superiority and more about relatability. These days, the most popular theories about humor have to do with incongruity. Things are funny when they don't add up, when they defy our expectations. That doesn't completely explain humor. Sometimes incongruity can be scary, frustrating, or just disappointing, but that definitely seems to explain part of it. A lot of what we consider funny seems to live in the space between expectations and reality. That incongruity might explain how America became the comedic superpower it is today. In terms of expectations, the founding fathers set the bar sky high, with promises of universal liberty, justice, and equality. But the reality has never quite lived up to those lofty ideals. From the very beginning, the United States has been defined by the gap between what it is and what it could be. Peering into that gap reveals no shortage of injustice and tragedy. But to the rare personality types who see a kindred spirit in Triboulet, America's streets were paved with comedy gold. To many Americans, the desire to hold a mirror to society's contradictions wasn't just for laughs. As with Triboulet after his faux pas with King Francis, it had become a matter of survival. The roots of modern stand-up comedy can be found in vaudeville. Vaudeville performances were rife with racism and crude ethnic stereotypes, but they were also the earliest form of mass entertainment in America to cross racial and ethnic boundaries. The audiences were segregated. African Americans were typically restricted to seats in the upper balcony, but on stage, black and white entertainers would perform side by side. Vaudeville also created a space for different ethnic groups to mingle. The collision between cultures laid the groundwork for a distinctly American entertainment culture. One legendary vaudeville performer, Charlie Case, had an act that was unlike anything his audiences had ever seen. He didn't dance, sing, or use any props, aside from a piece of string that he compulsively twisted with his fingers. Instead, he would stand at center stage and in an easy, conversational tone, relate completely fictional anecdotes about his life. The era of stand-up comedy had arrived. Unlike the broad, physical comedy that characterized vaudeville comedy at the time, Case's act was closer to the low-key, deadpan humor you might find in a Bob Newhart routine, maybe with a dash of that blithe naivete that Sarah Silverman had perfected in her comic persona. Case left it up to the audience to fill the gap between what he said and what he implied. One of his more well-known jokes, for instance, was that his real name was John Cass, but that he had to change it because audience members kept calling him Jack. Jack Cass. Get it? Like many vaudeville performers, Case performed in blackface, an offensive practice that was unfortunately pretty ubiquitous in American entertainment at the time. Case's story was complicated. His rise to fame was accompanied by widespread speculation that he was of mixed race and was passing for white. After he died in 1916, these claims were bolstered by journalists who knew him personally. Case's groundbreaking act spawned a generation of comedians who would go on to topple barriers in the entertainment industry that were long thought to be unassailable. Many people would agree, Charlie Case was the first stand-up comedian. During the 1940s, 50s, and early 60s, the so-called Borscht Belt incubated the careers of people whose names are practically synonymous with stand-up. Names like Henny Youngman, Joan Rivers, Rodney Dangerfield, Don Rickles, Milton Berle, Sid Caesar, Mel Brooks, Gene Carroll, and a particularly foul-mouthed, freewheeling political rabble-rouser named Lenny Bruce. Like Triboulet, Bruce liked to push the limits of what public authorities would permit. He was arrested several times for obscenity in the 1950s and 60s. In 1962, he was arrested in Chicago and convicted of violating a state obscenity law. His appeal, which he won, resulted in a landmark decision on free expression in 1964. In The People vs. Bruce, the Supreme Court of Illinois recognized Bruce's right to satirize society's attitudes on contemporary social problems and to express his ideas, however bizarre, as long as the method used in doing so was not so objectionable as to render the entire performance obscene. He wasn't so lucky when he got arrested in Greenwich Village that year. A 3-judge panel sentenced him to 4 months. That case was eventually overturned in 1970, but Bruce had died of a drug overdose 4 years earlier. The stand-up scene was fragmented. While Jewish comedians were honing their material in Catskill resorts, Black comics had assembled a string of venues, mostly in the South. Known informally as the Chitlin Circuit, this collection of nightclubs in Houston, Memphis, New Orleans, Indianapolis, and elsewhere was best known for its live music. It played a key role in nurturing the seeds of rock and roll from the 1930s to the early 1960s. And it was also where Black stand-ups like Butterbeans and Susie, Red Fox, and Rudy Ray Moore, better known as Dolomite, launched their careers. And it was also where a young man from Peoria, Illinois named Richard Pryor got his big break before moving to New York City in 1963. Widely regarded as the greatest stand-up comedian in American history, Pryor embraced a vast range of Black comedic styles. Like Moms Mabley and Dick Gregory, he didn't hold back when it came to sharp political criticism. Like Red Fox, he embraced a tell-it-like-it-is authenticity. And like Flip Wilson, his exuberance was infectious. Pryor was able to make fun of anyone and everyone, including himself, and he drew both Black and white audiences alike without compromising his culture. His impact on stand-up comedy was nothing short of revolutionary. Thanks in large part to Pryor, stand-up comedy saw a resurgence in the late 1970s and 1980s. The debut of Saturday Night Live in 1975 created a new career path for up-and-coming writers and comics, one that offered the promise of lucrative movie deals. SNL and sketch comedy often served as a means of scathing and timely social commentary. Audiences have come to both expect and look forward to Saturday Night Live's ability to satirize current events with sketch comedy and faux news reporters during their weekend update bits. HBO, which began in the early 1980s, was also influential and enabled comics to gain a national following with hour-long stand-up specials. The 80s also saw a boom in comedy clubs, with more than 250 clubs springing up in the United States between 1980 and 1987. The comedy club bubble burst in the 1990s, but not before television networks and cable stations saw the value of airing long-form stand-up specials and sketch comedy shows like Mr. Show and In Living Color. The 90s was also when comedians playing themselves or characters based on their lives became a mainstay on broadcast television. Marketing departments keen to capitalize on the star's natural draw would often result in sitcoms bearing the comedian's name, While they often came with one comedian's name, like Seinfeld or Martin or Roseanne, the impact and hilarity was the result of a cast of talented performers. Comedians would remain household names thanks to the long-running syndication of these 22-minute situational comedies. After spending the middle of the 20th century in the wilderness, stand-up comedy cemented itself in American entertainment culture. No part of society has been left untouched by the rise of the internet, and stand-up comedy is no exception. The emergence of user-generated content in the early 2000s, followed by the meteoric rise of social networks in the 2010s, has placed a potential mass audience at the fingertips of everyone with an internet connection. The complaint, "everyone's a comedian," first emerged in print in the 1970s, but it's never been more true than today. Even those of us who have no desire to tell jokes to a live audience often feel the pressure to crack jokes on social media, ideally the kind of jokes that go viral for highlighting one of society's contradictions. That's a dangerous game for amateurs to play, given how easy it is for an ironic tweet to be misread as serious. Even professional humorists regularly get tripped up on social media. Much of the content shared online every day are jokes that have been reduced to their core functional elements. Memes. These self-propagating units of culture are similar to genes in that they pass on an idea or joke from one person to another. Memes have become the core form of content created and consumed by millions, if not billions, of people every day. Their purpose appears to be purely entertainment, but there have been several moments in modern history where simple jokes shared online have influenced political elections. Memes were even deployed during the war in Ukraine to help generate public support for the war effort. All of these memes, along with everything else we post online, will eventually get scraped by one algorithm or another, and some of this data is being used to train increasingly powerful machine learning systems. The sophistication of these systems is growing by leaps and bounds. The printing press popularized Triboulet, the railways and telegraphs gave us vaudeville, and cinema fragmented its culture. What will machine learning do to our sense of humor? Some experts are convinced that technology will keep accelerating to the point where humans can't comprehend the rate of change. Will the jokes of the future be written by computers? And if so, will we be able to comprehend them, or will they go over our heads? As long as we're on this side of the technological singularity, it's impossible for us to know. And there's only one way to find out: get to the other side. For more videos like this, be sure to subscribe right now and hit that notification bell to make sure you don't miss any great content. And look for CuriosityStream on social media, links in the description.